A desperate man. A silent predator. What made the wolf step out from the shadows and save him? Some bonds are older than fear. Caleb didn't come to be found. The wind stirred the treetops like a whispered warning, and Caleb stood still beneath the pines, letting the cold bite through his coat without flinching. His boots crunched softly on the frost-crusted ground, a sound swallowed quickly by the forest's hush. In every direction, the trees stretched tall and unfeeling, cloaked in early snow, their branches like outstretched arms too tired to embrace. He'd parked the truck 2 miles down the trail, left the keys inside, door cracked open. No note. No plan. The act was quiet, not dramatic, just a slipping away, like breath in winter. He walked deeper. His pack was light. A flask of water. Jerky. A compass he barely glanced at. And buried in the front pocket of his jacket, a small, faded photograph, a boy grinning, arms thrown around Caleb's shoulders, both laughing at something unseen. The edges of the photo were worn soft as cloth. Caleb hadn't looked at it in 2 days. Not since the motel off Route 6 where he'd woken to the empty side of the bed and known the world didn't care if he came back. The sky darkened early. The storm was coming. It had been building since the morning, a low-pressure ache in his skull and the taste of copper in the back of his throat. He welcomed it. The cold made the air honest. It didn't pretend to care. It just took. By dusk, he found a place to stop, a natural hollow between 2 granite outcrops, protected from the worst of the wind. He cleared a space, slow and methodical, laying down pine boughs before unrolling the old military bivy sack he'd used on camping trips with his brother. That was before. Before the hospital. Before the screaming breaks. Before Caleb forgot how to sleep. The fire took longer than it should have. His fingers were clumsy. He struck the flint again and again, sparks catching briefly before fading. He didn't curse. Just kept trying. It wasn't frustration. It was a kind of penance. When it finally caught, the flame flickered low and hungry, a whisper of light that made the snow around him glow faintly orange. Caleb watched it, silent, pulled the photograph from his pocket and held it near the fire, not close enough to burn. Not yet. His thumb rested against the edge, smudging the ink. He whispered the boy's name once. Just once. Like tasting something you're not sure your body can still hold. The fire cracked softly in reply. Night deepened. The stars blinked between slow-moving clouds, and the wind carried sounds, branches groaning, something distant shifting through snow. Caleb leaned against his pack, half asleep, his breath visible in the cold air. In that moment, it would have been easy to forget he had once had a life. A real one. There were no reminders here. No phone buzzing with guilt. No messages left unread. Just the rhythm of his own heart, slowing against the earth. He dreamed of water. Black water. Freezing. His brother's hand slipping below the surface, eyes wide with disbelief, mouth moving without sound. Caleb reaching, too late. Always too late. He woke with a gasp, fists clenched in his sleeping bag, the fire burned low to glowing coals. The woods were utterly still. Then, faintly, so faintly he wasn't sure he'd truly heard it, a long, low howl. It came from far beyond the ridge, threading through the trees like smoke. Not urgent. Not close. Just there. He didn't move. Didn't even breathe. The sound didn't come again. Only the wind, whispering its 1,000 languages. He sat up slowly. Unzipped the bag. The night air slapped him awake. He knelt beside the coals, feeding them thin strips of bark until the fire blinked back to life. His breath came in short, frosted puffs. A wolf. He didn't feel afraid. It was odd, he hadn't felt anything in days. Fear might have been welcome. He didn't sleep again. Just sat there, staring into the fire, remembering how his brother used to laugh when Caleb tried to tell scary stories on their camping trips. How he'd once made a ridiculous wolf howl that sent the boy into breathless giggles for 10 straight minutes. His brother had dared him to howl back. Now, years later, the sound returned, not in jest, but woven into the cold itself. By morning, the storm had arrived. The sky was a dull pewter, snow falling with a slow persistence that promised it wouldn't stop for a while. Caleb packed methodically. Ate a single protein bar. Sipped from the flask, which was half frozen. The forest looked different under fresh snow, paths hidden, shadows softened. Even the trees seemed reluctant to stand tall beneath the weight. He kept walking. Midday, he realized he was off the trail. He checked the compass. North. But the terrain didn't match what he remembered. A fallen log he'd passed on day one was nowhere in sight. He backtracked. Nothing looked familiar. His breath quickened, not panic, but something close. Still he pressed forward. Around him, the forest thickened. Old growth. Massive trunks like cathedral pillars. The silence became heavier, broken only by the occasional snap of ice-laden branches. Then, ahead, a flash of movement. Caleb froze. It had been quick, almost too quick to register. A shape low to the ground, slipping between the trees. He waited, muscles taut. Nothing. He scanned the snow. No tracks. No sound. The forest had sealed the gap behind whatever passed. He moved slower after that. Late afternoon, the sky dimming, he slipped on an icy slope and went down hard. His knee twisted beneath him with a sickening pop. The pain was immediate and electric, sharp enough to make him cry out, just once. Then he lay still, cheek pressed into the snow, breathing shallow, eyes wide. The pain didn't go away. When he tried to stand, his leg folded beneath him. He sat back, teeth clenched, breath fogging wildly. Perfect, he muttered aloud. His voice sounded wrong. Foreign. He crawled to a nearby tree and leaned against it, snow already reclaiming the spot where he'd fallen. He knew the cold would come faster now. Knew how hypothermia worked. The rational part of his brain ticked off the signs: confusion, drowsiness, slowed heartbeat. He looked up at the branches overhead, their tips coated in pale frost. The forest was still. Watching. He thought of the photograph. It was still in his coat pocket. Still dry. Still whole. He almost laughed. Instead, he pulled his coat tighter and reached into his pack, dragging out the emergency tarp. He fashioned a crude lean-to against the tree. Not much shelter, but enough to break the wind. The pain throbbed in waves. He bit down on the strap of his pack to keep from shouting. He lasted another hour before the shivering began. Somewhere in the dark, another howl lifted. Closer now. He listened. The sound curved through the trees, low, drawn out, almost mournful. Not menacing. Just present. Like the forest itself had a voice, and it had chosen this moment to use it. He whispered, hoarse. "What do you want?" The trees said nothing. But the wind seemed to soften. As if the storm, for a breath, was listening too. He didn't sleep. His leg wouldn't let him. He drifted in and out, half conscious, half dreaming. Images surfaced and broke: a hospital room, pale blue walls. His brother's face, bruised but smiling. An apology he never gave. A phone call ignored. In one of those dreamlike moments, he thought he saw something. Eyes, low to the ground, blinking from the edge of the tree line. Amber. Curious. The shape of a head. A shadow of fur. Then gone. He didn't trust his vision. But he whispered anyway. "If you're real, don't leave." The fire was gone by morning. The last match used, the last ember cold. He unwrapped the photograph. His fingers trembled too much to hold it steady. But he looked. A boy. 17. A ridiculous grin. Caleb's arm around his neck, both of them covered in river mud. He touched the face gently, and fed it to the fire pit, though there was no flame. Snow fell steadily, and then, a sound. Footsteps? Not human. Light. Steady. He turned his head. Nothing visible. Just the forest. The trees. The silence. But then, in the freshly fallen snow near his shelter, prints. Large. Not cat. Not bear. He knew what they were. Wolf. The tracks curved around the edge of his tarp, then disappeared back into the trees. He exhaled, slow and shaky. He wasn't alone. The thought should have frightened him. Instead, it wrapped around him like something faintly warm. A heartbeat in the distance. And he whispered again, lips chapped, throat raw. "Please." It wasn't a prayer. Not quite. Just the first real word he'd said in days. The forest didn't answer. But in its silence, something shifted. As if, for the first time since he'd arrived, it had started listening. And somewhere, just out of sight, something wild had chosen to stay. The storm lasted through the night. When the sky lightened, it did so reluctantly, bleeding gray behind a curtain of snow that showed no intention of lifting. Caleb lay still beneath the sagging tarp, his breath shallow, lips cracked. His leg throbbed with dull heat, the kind of pain that doesn't scream, just whispers relentlessly. He counted seconds by the shivers in his spine, by the way his fingers refused to obey. He hadn't expected to wake. And yet, here he was. The prints remained. In the snow, just feet from his shelter, the wolf's tracks curved softly, too close to be accidental. A semicircle. A pause. And then gone, swallowed into the line of trees. No sign of pursuit, no sign of aggression. Just presence. Caleb stared at them for a long while. He didn't try to move at first. His leg wouldn't allow it. But his eyes stayed fixed to the trail the animal had left behind. Part of him wondered if he'd imagined it all, hallucination brought on by cold and grief. But the tracks were real. Sharper than anything else around him. More certain than his own sense of direction. More real than any memory in his aching mind. The forest didn't speak, but it had started to echo. Later that morning, Caleb tried to stand. He used a fallen branch for balance, bark rough beneath his fingers. His knee screamed, but it held, barely. He tested the weight, then took a step. Then, another. Small, careful movements, like a newborn deer. The tarp flapped behind him as he moved toward the prints, following them 10 paces before they vanished where the snow had drifted. His breath hitched as he turned back to camp, to the fire pit full of frozen ash. He was low on food, the last of it chewed down to shreds. Water was easy enough to find, melted snow, but everything else was becoming harder. He limped through the morning, scanning the horizon for something, anything that resembled a trail. Nothing. Just endless trees and the pale hum of wind. The world was wide and wordless, and he was a speck within it. Still, the wolf had been close. That meant something. He began talking, not in full sentences, not at first. Just fragments. Pieces of thought slipping into air, almost involuntary. I don't know where I am. My leg's bad. I don't think I can climb again. You're not really here, are you? The wind took each word like a secret. By late afternoon, he found himself at the edge of a frozen stream, barely more than a ribbon of ice threading through the trees. He remembered this place. Maybe. Or maybe it only felt familiar because the cold repeated itself over and over again, until everything blurred into the same pale ache. He sat, breathing hard. Pulled the compass from his jacket. It spun. He shook it. Tried again. North hovered, then drifted lazily toward west. He exhaled, a low sound almost like a laugh. Then threw the compass into the trees, where it vanished with a muted thud. He sat there a long time. The sun faded slowly. Not like the dramatic endings in movies, but the quiet dying of a candle wick, inevitable, indifferent. As the last of the light thinned across the snow, he heard the howl again. Closer. It curved through the trees, low and resonant. Not angry. Not threatening. A sound full of distance, but not absence. He stood, heart ticking faster now. Scanned the ridge above. A shape. Half-shadowed between 2 trees. Too tall for a fox, too lean for a bear. Still. Watching. The wolf. Not a phantom, not a dream. Not a ghost from some mythic past. Caleb took a slow step forward. The animal didn't move. They stared at each other, 2 figures suspended in the hush of dusk, breathing the same sharp air. Then, with an almost imperceptible turn of its head, the wolf disappeared behind the trees. Gone. He didn't follow. Instead, he sat again. Let the cold settle into his bones. Night came. This time, he didn't make a fire. He had no matches left, and no strength to start one from scratch. The dark wrapped around him like water. He curled into himself beneath a fir tree, trying to remember how to be small. His leg pulsed. His breath came in fits. He dreamed again. Only this time, it wasn't the river. It was the hospital. 2 bright lights. Machines with names he never learned. The smell of bleach and sweat and something older, grief that lived in the walls. His brother's face, gray and soft and still too young. His mother's voice, hoarse with blame, and Caleb sitting silent in the corner, staring at the 4 drip as if it could reverse time. You should have driven. You were supposed to pick him up. You said you would. He hadn't answered. Not then. Not now. He woke to silence. And fresh snow. New prints, too. Leading away this time. Larger, more deliberate, not panicked. The same pause, same shape, threading a path deeper into the woods. He stared at them, unsure. Then he stood, limping slowly after them. He told himself it was stupid. Foolish. But it felt like movement. And movement meant warmth, however brief. He followed. The tracks led him through a copse of birches, their bark pale and peeling like old parchment. The snow was lighter here, and he moved easier, leaning on his makeshift cane. The wolf stayed unseen, but the trail remained. He kept talking as he walked, half to himself, half to the ghost of the animal. Why me? You could have run. You should have. Once he caught a flicker of fur ahead, gray and dark against the snow. A flash of eyes. Then gone again. Hours passed. Maybe more. The sky dimmed once again. He reached a small clearing ringed with heavy spruce. In the center, a fallen tree, hollowed by age, its insides dark and dry. Beneath it, scattered bones. Old. Weathered. Rodent, maybe. A rabbit's foot. A den. He didn't step closer. He sank into the snow, leg crumpling beneath him, body shaking. Not from fear. Not even from pain. From relief. Here, the wind couldn't reach. The snow was lighter. And somewhere close, the wolf watched. That night, he spoke aloud, not to the dark, but to the thing inside it. His name was Sam. The words came easier than he expected. He would have liked this. The trees. The quiet. He hated phones. He paused. Closed his eyes. I was late. That night. I told him I'd pick him up, but I stopped for gas. Stopped for a drink, too. It was just one. But I got there 10 minutes late. And he decided to walk. The wind rustled branches above him. He felt no judgment in it. He was 17. He laid back, staring at the blur of stars through the trees. They blinked slowly, like they were tired of shining. I haven't told anyone that out loud. In the silence that followed, he heard it again. Not a howl this time. A breath. Low. Just at the edge of hearing. He sat up, blinking hard. The wolf was there, barely visible at the clearing's edge. Closer than ever before. Its body still. Head tilted. Watching. Not a predator. Not a friend. Just a presence. A witness. He didn't speak again. Didn't try to move closer. They sat together in the dark, two creatures who had both lost something they couldn't name. When he woke the next morning, the wolf was gone. But the footprints remained. And beside them, something else. Half buried in snow, a hare, recently killed. Still warm beneath the frost. Placed, not dropped. Left where he would find it. He stared at it, breath caught. He didn't eat it. Couldn't. But he knelt beside it and whispered something even he didn't understand. Then he began walking again. Slowly. With care. The trail still had no clear end. But he was no longer walking alone. The snow had softened in the days since the storm, the hard crust giving way to a quieter kind of cold. Caleb walked slowly now, half hobbling, half dragging his leg along the wolf's fading tracks. He no longer checked his compass, which dangled uselessly from his pack like an old regret. The sun, weak as a lantern behind fog, barely shifted above the horizon. Time had blurred into cold hours and white light. Each breath was measured. Each step, a decision. He had stopped asking why the wolf lingered. Some things, once named, vanish. Instead, he followed. Not blindly, but willingly, because direction, even when uncertain, felt better than silence. He ate sparingly. Dried berries from a half-ripped pouch. Melted snow poured into a dented tin cup. The rabbit still weighed on him, not in his stomach, but somewhere deeper. A gift, he realized, not of sustenance but of recognition. The wolf had seen him. Had chosen to give something instead of taking. That meant something. In a world where even memories took, it mattered. Mid-morning, the air turned sharper. The cold moved differently, less like weather, more like warning. A wind from the northwest howled through the pine needles with teeth. Caleb pulled his coat tighter, adjusted the scarf around his neck. His knee ached badly now, every step sending a dull throb up through his hip. He used 2 branches now, crossed under his arms like crude crutches. One splintered with each use, but he kept going. By the time he reached the ridgeline, his breath was ragged and shallow. Below, a frozen valley stretched in bruised shades of blue and gray. The snow here was deeper, undisturbed except for the thread of tracks winding steadily toward a cluster of trees in the distance. He paused, rested, and then he saw it. The wolf, perched on a stone outcrop 100 yards ahead, framed against the skeletal sky. Its body still as stone, ears forward, breath fogging gently in the wind. It didn't move as Caleb stumbled closer. Didn't flee. Just watched. Waiting. That, too, had become a ritual. This stillness between them. A question that didn't need to be asked. A presence that didn't need to be proven. Caleb collapsed near a cluster of rocks and rested his head against his pack. His eyes burned with cold. He didn't sleep, not really. But the stillness of his body allowed his mind to float just above the surface of memory. He thought of Sam's room, posters on the wall, the faint smell of pine from the air freshener he'd insisted on using. He thought of the sound of the accident report being read aloud. Of his mother's silence on the phone. And then, strangely, he thought of the night they camped near Elk River. Sam had been 13. A storm had rolled in, and Caleb, barely 20, had tried to act unbothered. But Sam had seen through him, had grabbed his hand in the tent and said, "It's okay to be scared, you know." The wolf shifted, barely visible now behind a drift. Caleb opened his mouth, but no words came. That night, the wind turned violent. The makeshift shelter he built with branches collapsed around midnight, its spine cracked by the weight of freezing rain. Caleb scrambled to cover his gear, dragging himself beneath the overhang of a low rock face. The fire refused to catch. The wood was too wet. His fingers too numb. He struck the flint until his hands bled, and still nothing. He gave up, curled into himself, and let the dark take him. He dreamed of ice again. But this time, there was no drowning. Just a hand, small, cold, reaching toward his. Not accusing. Just there. When he woke, his breath came in stuttering gasps. The world was bone white. And the fire had been lit. He stared at it, blinking slowly. Thin flame. Smoldering bark. A single dry branch at the center, one he hadn't gathered. Beside it, faint paw prints. Fresh. He closed his eyes. Not out of fear. Out of something closer to awe. He stayed there the entire next day, too weak to move. The wind died by afternoon, but the cold remained cruel. He wrapped his leg with torn strips from his extra shirt, used melted snow to clean the blood that had crusted along his sockline. His ankle was swollen, purple. He knew he couldn't go much farther. But still, he waited. And so did the animal. Each evening, he caught sight of it. Never close. Always on the edge of vision. Watching. Never eating. Never approaching. But present. He began to speak to it more often now. Not out of madness, but because silence had grown too loud. "I don't think I can go much farther," he said once. The wind rustled pine needles in reply. Another time, "You don't owe me anything." And later still, "I left because I thought I deserved to disappear. But I think I just didn't know how to stay." The wolf never answered. But it never left. And that, more than anything, kept him from giving up. One night, the stars broke through. Clear sky. No wind. Just the creak of snow settling and the faint, near imperceptible hum of forest breath. Caleb lay on his back, staring up. The world felt enormous again, but not empty. He whispered Sam's name once. Let it float upward into the dark. The next morning, the wolf was gone. He searched the tree-line, but found only old tracks, half covered. No fresh prints. No scent. Just absence. He tried to move on without it. He lasted 6 hours. Then his body gave out. Near a boulder slick with ice, his knee buckled completely. The pain flared white, then went hollow. He hit the snow hard, rolled onto his side. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't stand. A sob slipped loose. Not from pain. From shame. He curled in on himself, pressing his face to the ground. Let it take him. Let the snow hide him. Let the world be rid of him. He didn't know how long he lay there. Maybe hours. Maybe days. But then, a sound. Voices. Human. Faint, but real. Crunching footsteps. Barking. A flashlight's distant beam cutting through trees like a spear. Then, "We've got someone. Over here." Hands. Warm. Rough. Gloves against his cheek. A voice saying, "Stay with us, buddy. You're okay. You're okay." He tried to speak. Couldn't. Then blackness. And somewhere in it, a howl. Low. Steady. Fading. He woke in warmth. Clean sheets. Beeping machines. The hum of something alive. A hospital. A ranger sitting in the chair beside him, sipping coffee. "You're lucky," the man said, voice soft. "A few more hours and, well." Caleb nodded. Or tried to. The ranger smiled. "We got a report someone heard a howl near Devil's Ridge. That's why we sent the team that way. Otherwise, nobody would have looked that far west." Caleb blinked. Slow. A howl. Yeah. Weird, right? The ranger stood. "Get some rest. You're safe now." He left. And Caleb, still drifting between pain and sleep, turned his face to the window. Snow was falling again. But now, it didn't feel like an ending. Just a season. Caleb healed slowly. Not just his leg, though the fracture had left him on crutches for weeks and limping for longer. The deeper injury, the one no X-ray could catch, mended in quieter ways. He didn't speak of the wolf in the hospital. When asked how he survived, he said he didn't remember much. Cold. Trees. A fire that lit itself. Search dogs. Relief. People nodded. They offered platitudes. The kind meant to reassure but not touch. A nurse handed him back the tattered photograph, found in his coat. The corners were singed now, the boy's smile half-shadowed by ash. Caleb stared at it for a long time before slipping it into a drawer without a word. Home was strange when he returned. Not the same apartment, he'd let that go months ago. He stayed in a borrowed cabin on the edge of a quiet town, a place with more trees than streetlights and a single cafe that served soup from scratch. He liked the silence. It didn't demand anything. Winter lingered. Snow held to rooftops like memory, slow to melt. He spent mornings by the window, drinking coffee black and watching crows flit between bare branches. In the afternoons, he walked short trails with a wooden cane and a thermos of broth. He brought breadcrumbs in a pocket for sparrows. His steps were slow, but steady. He didn't mind going nowhere. There was a boy from the wildlife center who delivered groceries every Friday. Mason. 17, gangly and wide-eyed, full of questions he didn't quite dare ask. He spoke in bursts, like he was still deciding what parts of himself were safe to show. Caleb let him talk. Didn't say much back, but he listened. One day, Mason lingered by the door. "You ever see wolves out there?" he asked, almost casual. Caleb paused. "Why?" The boy shrugged. "We had one tagged a while back. Big male. Gray. Lost the signal near the park boundary last month. Might be dead. Or the collar failed. They do that." Caleb nodded. "Maybe it slipped off." "Maybe," Mason echoed, then smiled awkwardly. "Anyway, if you ever see tracks, just let us know." He left. The door closed behind him with a soft click. That night, Caleb went through his drawer, pulled out the photo, laid it flat on the table, smoothing the edge. Sam's eyes stared up at him. "I made it," Caleb whispered. The words felt strange on his tongue. "I didn't think I would." He didn't expect an answer. But the silence felt warmer than before. Later that week, he walked farther than usual. Past the old ranger station. Up a narrow trail lined with frost-sharpened thistle. The sky was bruised with cloud, the light dimming early. He carried an old, threadbare blanket in his pack and half a loaf of bread he didn't plan to eat. At the trail's end, where the trees opened to a low ridge, he found a flat patch of snow and laid the blanket out slowly. Then he sat, facing north, the bread beside him. Not a ritual. Not quite. But something like offering. The wind rose, carrying scents of pine and thawed bark. He closed his eyes. Waited. There was no sound at first. Then, faintly, so faintly, he heard it. A single, low howl. Not close. But not far. His breath caught, but he didn't rise. Didn't call out. He just listened. It wasn't the sound itself that moved him. It was the knowing that somewhere out there, beyond sight, beyond logic, something had once waited beside him when he could give nothing in return. And now, he would do the same. Weeks passed. The snow began to melt in earnest, first in patches, then in streams. Birds returned. Buds formed on skeletal branches. Life moved without asking permission. Caleb did, too. He began volunteering at the wildlife center. Quiet work, cataloging, carrying supplies, cleaning cages. Mason lit up each time he showed. They didn't talk much about the forest. But when Mason asked if he'd ever go back, Caleb only said, "In time." Spring came, hesitant and unsure, as though testing its right to return. The cabin stayed cold in the mornings, but the sun lingered longer each day. One evening, as the sky spilled orange over the treetops, Caleb stood outside with a mug of tea and watched the horizon. He no longer searched for movement. He didn't have to. Some part of him now carried the woods, always. In his pocket was a folded note. He'd written it weeks ago. A single line. No address. No stamp. He walked down to the riverbank, the water swollen and quick with melt. Opened the paper. Read it aloud, he told himself. He tried. His throat caught. So instead, he whispered it, not to the water, but to the wind. "I forgive you." The current carried the paper away, soft and slow. The next morning, Mason arrived earlier than usual. He carried a small parcel, something wrapped in cloth. "It's from the tracker team," he said, setting it on the table. "They found it by the North Ridge." Caleb unwrapped it gently. Inside, a cracked GPS collar. The tag half torn, the strap shredded at one end. Burn marks near the clasp. He turned it over in his hands. They said the animal probably forced it off. Maybe chewed it loose. Caleb nodded, silent. Mason looked uncertain. "We don't know where he went. Maybe Canada. Maybe just farther." "That's okay," Caleb said, and meant it. Later, when the boy had gone, he stood at the tree-line behind the cabin, held the collar in both hands. Then, gently, he placed it on a rock and left it there. A marker. A memory. A thank you. Days folded into each other. Not always gentle, not always kind, but livable. He planted things. Herbs, mostly. Started cooking again. Ate slowly. Remembered how to enjoy warmth without guilt. On the first clear morning of June, he hiked to the ridge again. This time without his cane. His knee still ached, but he bore it with quiet resolve. At the top, where the wind came unfiltered, he sat on the old blanket. Closed his eyes. A bird called somewhere below. Then, far off, carried by memory more than sound, a single howl. He smiled. Not to himself, but toward it. "I heard you," he said softly. "And I remember." Then he stood and walked home. If this story touched you, subscribe or share where you're watching from. These stories matter.